Hi, everybody. So it's morning time in Los Angeles here. I moved here 5 years ago, and my name is Amy Leverton. I have a platform called Denim Dudes, Instagram and blog and all of that stuff. And what I do is my actual day job to pay my rent is trend forecasting. So I'm going to start off by, I just threw in a little bit of my bio there. But I think after listening to a few of the other presentations, I will make it a little bit more specific to my trajectory out of university. So I went to Kingston University and I studied fashion design. When I was a kid, I was like, I want to design dresses. And that was what I was all about. And it's funny because I think my upbringing, I lived in the countryside and I was a bit of a tomboy. So I think, the whole idea of design sometimes is sort of discovering your own personal style, and you sometimes just don't even know what that is. So you have an idea of what you want to be, but you've got to really listen to, look at the projects that you excel at. The projects that I did really well on were denim and casual wear related. And it wasn't until I looked back at my portfolio years later, I was like, oh yeah, it was all very clear. But at the time, when you're at university, that's the whole point. You're there to sort of learn what you're better at, what you excel at, and what you enjoy the most. So I went out of uni, and actually that's where Mawson and I met. We worked at a company called Okini, and so I spent about 4 years as a casual wear and denim designer in the industry. Now, in trend forecasting, you find people who come from all walks of life. Journalism is a very popular background. And design, the reason I think that design is a great background to come into trend forecasting from is because essentially you're telling designers or sharing designers with, your research and your inspiration. So at the end of the day, to have an idea of, Leanne was obviously telling us all about the design process, and knowing what a designer's day by day capabilities are and jobs that they need to do kind of helps. But yeah, people go into trend forecasting from lots of different directions. There are actually trend forecasting courses now, and there weren't when I was around. So I went from design into trend forecasting. I was just lucky. A job came up at WJSN, which is the world's sort of leading trend forecasting company. And I worked super hard on a project and managed to get in. And I worked at WJSN and Style Site for a few years. And then I released my first book, Denim Dudes, in 2015, and then Dudettes in 2018. So really what my job in trend forecasting, before Corona, I did a lot of traveling, and, I think that's been talked about a lot, sniffing out inspiration, traveling the world, going to places like Japan and really analyzing and watching how people are wearing their jeans, how people are styling their jeans is really, really important. And, looking at runway, looking all over the place, but I'm going to talk you through that in a second. So that's about me. That's my trajectory. If there's anything that I've missed off, then I think I've got definitely time for questions. So throw a couple of questions in the little section. First off, going to talk a little bit about trends, because some people, including my mum, have no freaking idea what it is. And people are very fascinated by it. So I've tried to distill it down. Trend is the process of something, be it an item of clothing or a color or an attitude or a lifestyle choice, growing in popularity or veering in a certain direction. Trends are patterns, and if you spend enough time looking, the clues will always point you in the right direction. I often talk about this when we start a new season. We might have ideas. We're seeing this, we're seeing that. We have an idea of, what about that last collection from, Louis Vuitton? And I think we should do something on that. You have an idea in your head of things that you want to do or you feel passionate for. But I always say, well, let's just listen to the images, because the images will tell you. You just got to listen to what they're saying. It's about connecting the dots and looking for the patterns. So going back a little bit, trends really exist because of human behavior. We're kind of like pack animals. We're seeking outside validation, and we wear clothes to express ourselves, our individuality, creating an image about ourselves, or a certain, I want to look very sophisticated and elegant today, or or I'm 45 and I'm not ready to grow up and I still want to wear streetwear. Whatever it is, it's saying something about us. And usually it's a bit of the sort of standing out and the fitting in thing. We talk about that a lot in trend. The idea that you want to stand out from the crowd, but you also want to fit in with your peers. So our clothes, our apartments, our cars, what we eat, how we work out and where we work out, where we travel, how much we share of that on Instagram. All these things are choices that we've made that tell us and the people around us who we are. Even political views, all of that stuff is really important. It's signaling to other people who we are, and to ourselves as well, give ourselves a sense of self. And obviously these days, those choices are flexed and shared and showcased even more than ever before. So we as trend forecasters can figure out what's next pretty easily by, really, we look at social media an awful lot. And of course, runway and all of that stuff, which I'll talk about. So it is very interesting. These days, it's very much about culture and where culture is going. So where to look? Where do I look? Well, I've kind of decided to split this into three just to stop it from being overwhelming. Intuition, really important. Some people have just got this sixth sense in trend. You've got to like what you do, because you've got to be constantly inspired and driven. I've never met a forecaster who doesn't devour images like chocolate or mash or cheese or whatever your thing is. So you really, you need to have that drive to constantly look and constantly be curious. If you don't have that, it just doesn't work. Obviously, research. This is broad, I know, but we're talking magazines. It used to be magazines a lot back in the day, and now it's less magazines, more online, Instagram, and all the online magazines. It's articles, reading a lot of articles. Business of Fashion is a great platform. Kingpins is a great platform as well. Podcasts, listening to a ton of podcasts, going through all the runway shows on Vogue, not just the ones with denim in them or the ones that you like. Going through it all is really, really important. Street style blogs, streetwear is very, very important. Tumblr's less so than they used to be, but still. And then finally, real life. Real life is kind of a mixture of intuition and research, right? It's like sometimes when things happen in front of your nose, say you're at a fashion show in person, or you go to Tokyo in person, you see something, it sticks in your head more. And it's much easier to see the patterns. So getting out there is hard at the moment. But back in the day, going to festivals, concerts, art galleries, I think Leanne talked about that. General travel really does help. Also stats, focus groups, figures, numerical data, all of that stuff. And some of that stuff can come from articles. So, trend. Trend is often seen as a bit of a dirty word in our industry, because I wanted to talk about sustainability in here a little bit, especially in light of the current global environmental catastrophe that is currently unfolding. I'm sure you've all, or you should all watch, Extinction with David Attenborough, for instance. But trend doesn't just drive mass consumption and manufacturing. It's a big part of what I do as a consultant, to tell brands how to be more responsible, how to be more environmentally conscious and cleaner. So macro trends, they are more about these large consumer shifts. So this would be the sort of things like sustainability and wellness, et cetera, et cetera. So a good example of this is heritage. So this sort of denim heritage trend, that was like 2008, and that happened after the last market crash. So we're thinking an awful lot about that in the moment, because obviously we're kind of in this sort of very unsettled time. People were driven towards built to last attitude and quality made goods, and started asking the questions of where things were made and who by, et cetera, et cetera. So those are examples of big macro trends. Micro trends are more apparel driven, but also longer. So it wouldn't be just like a flash in the pan thing. It would be something that, like, so for instance, I've said Crocs, because people are kind of like comfort, indoors, outdoors, practical. It's like a blank canvas, like a jean in a way, a Croc. It can be a lot of different things to different people. They come in lots of shapes and sizes, as we know. So that would be a micro trend. So it's longer, but it's still apparel driven and it's still a bit more surface. And then fads, these are closer to season trends. And a good example of that would be the tie-dye tracksuit. You know, that is something that hit massive saturation point in kind of like April because of the lockdown and because of tie-dye. And it was just like a great combination. So that's a shorter one. You know, people are not going to be wearing tie-dye tracksuits in 10 years, for instance. But with the macro trends, it's like people will be thinking about wellness and sustainability in 10 years. Does that make sense? I'm going to scoot through this really quickly because I don't know how I'm doing time-wise, but this is just to give you an example. So I do the trend for Kingpins. Obviously you are probably very familiar. That's the denim fabric trade show, and that's now online. We used to go to Hong Kong and Amsterdam and New York and China. So I present to them, I create these big macro trends. Last season, we started with these big overarching themes because more than ever, these big macro trends are really important. And that's something that I've noticed in my career. Things like the skinny jean, it is important. Silhouette is important. But these big consumer trends are the things that are driving how people interact with clothing these days. So I'm going to go through these quickly. We had recession, stroke depression, which I've talked about earlier. Is there going to be a super recession? Is there going to be a short, sharp shock to the industry? So we, look at the uncertainty. This we put together in about April time. Then we had humbled. Everyone was kind of like more mindful about their shopping decisions. What was valuable today was different from, say, last year. People were resetting their belief systems, all of that stuff. Another thing that we went into was nearshore. So kind of like what's happening with fast fashion, is that coming to an end? Also, we were forced in a way from being global to being local, and shopping from home. I mean, I live in LA, but I was getting lemons from like a neighbor, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that kind of stuff really makes people think differently about where they get their stuff from. Then we had super sustainability. Obviously, sustainability is something we have talked about for years, but it's becoming more and more poignant as time goes on. As we are, I guess, approaching a point of no return, but also because of coronavirus, people were watching, the carbon emissions are going down, et cetera, et cetera. There was a lot of make, do, and mend. How long am I going to have my pair of jeans for? And I have more time on my hands. Maybe I could mend it. Then we had the creative boom, led me very well into that segue. COVID-19 forced people to dream, to think about, okay, well, maybe I've lost my job, but maybe it wasn't my dream job after all, and maybe I'd like to do something else. Or I have more time on my hands, I want to learn a new skill. Or I've always had this passion and I'm pretty good at it, but I have more time to spend on it. And then finally, Alone Together, the idea of people really bonding online, not being able to see each other in person. And so those connections have suddenly come to the forefront, and they're more important than they used to be. So those were some of the things, for instance, that we looked at last season, and then those would then trickle down into actual trends and essentially would shape the denim jacket of 2021, for instance. And, it comes from things like, health, wellness, lifestyle choices, like I said, sustainability, being humble. All of those things really affect the way that a consumer will purchase. We very much look at, future consumers. Obviously, we look at younger people more than, say, boomers, for instance, because that's where all the innovation is and that's where all the change is going to happen. And they're the new generation of consumers who are coming up. I skimmed through that pretty fast. I don't know what I'm on time-wise. But yeah, that's it. That's what I've got for you. I hope that was helpful and gives you a bit of an insight into how trends work. You can follow me on Denim Dudes. Just get that plug in. Get on the social media, but we also write a lot of articles around this kind of stuff for both Kingpins and for our own site.